Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete a small milestone, episode 20 of our Rimworld Ice Sheet Survival series. Before we jump into the action, I have a quick announcement to make. Maybe some of you haven't heard yet, but there is now an official Pete Complete Patreon. If you like what I'm doing here on YouTube, then Patreon is a great way to support me. It allows me to keep doing what I do and to continue to focus on quality over quantity, which I honestly think is one of the big reasons you watch this channel. If you want to support the Patreon, then you can find a link on screen right now, and there will also be one in the description and the comments as well as at the end of the video. Now, let's get to it. Time to take care of business out on the ice sheet. As you might remember, in the previous episode we built ourselves a geothermal generator. And that generator is now supplying the colony with a lot of electricity. However, there are still a few things we could improve in our power supply. Before we can get to that, however, we have a breakdown of one of the solar panels, which we are quickly going to fix here before we start working. Now, to start things off, we have to remove a bit of the wall here, because the wind turbine is unfortunately blocking access to the area behind the generator. Up next, we are then going to make sure that both the batteries and the turrets are no longer hooked up to the generator itself. That way, we also no longer have the battery connected to the active power network, which I have learned from CRM Ashworth, I hope I pronounced that correctly, can be a bit of a risk. Instead, we now once again have a switch between the battery and the power supply, as well as another one between the battery and the turrets. The first one can be used to charge the battery, the second one to activate the turrets. Now, for the moment, all of the turrets are still connected to the generator itself, and therefore they all put an unnecessary power draw on the system. We can, however, reconnect them all to the small piece of conduit coming out of the battery, and now they are no longer active, unless of course we flick the switch. This makes the whole system a bit more streamlined, and we don't waste as much energy on turrets that we don't need. Now up next, as we have an eclipse coming in, I want to address another comment. John, a very creative name by the way, suggested that we put down sterile tiles in the research room. And while that will cost us a significant amount of silver, I still think it's a good idea. The sterile tiles will improve the room's cleanliness rating, which in turn actually has a positive effect on research speed. Now, it will take Cambiar a while to get the construction finished here, but once the project is finished, he will research even faster than before. Ironically enough though, just moments after wrapping up the building process, Cambiar gets sick with the flu. Now we have more than enough medicine on hand to treat the disease, and so we are switching Cambiar to normal medicine use for the time being, but all in all we don't need to worry too much about this. The flu isn't really the most deadly disease in the game. Healthy colonists should be able to build up immunity fairly quickly, and so while Cambiar's stats will be slightly reduced for a while, he will most likely come out of this completely fine. While Cambiar's asleep then, we have cargo pods crashing down on the ice sheet. And this drop right here could not be more valuable at this time. You might remember from the last episode we are slowly but steadily moving towards a small food problem. Our huskies are pretty quick when it comes to consuming the reserves, and so more than 200 units of potatoes here are a welcome surprise. And despite being sick, a well-rested Cambiar immediately heads out for the potatoes on the next morning, and honestly I can't blame him. I'm sure he's not too happy that he has to share the human meat with the huskies. Those huskies, as you can see, are also moving out already. They should be able to haul the rest of the potatoes inside themselves, and so after Cambiar once again treats his disease, this time with herbal medicine, he can now head back to bed and rest. With the potatoes safely stored away, we can now also once again close off the human meat supplies for the huskies. There is no need for them to be in here, the potatoes will feed them just as well, so we can leave the human meat and the mood buffs that come with it for Cambiar. During the afternoon I was keeping a close eye on hypothermia for the huskies. It is a bit too cold for comfort for them outside, but then again they have warm shelter available should they need it. A few moments later then we have a Meteorite Crash, and this time for a change it's not silver, instead it's a Limestone Meteorite, but at least for the moment we don't really have much use for that. Just as a safety measure here, I also sent the huskies back into their room, and I also had the colony haul the potatoes in there, just so the animals don't have to walk as far. With Cambiar's flu then once again treated and him moving closer to immunity, we now have time for the next research project. And yes, I am slowly but steadily thinking about hydroponics. There is at least one thing I want to get done before that, however, and that is to research mortars. I would consider us lucky that we haven't had a siege yet in this playthrough, but should we get one, at least the outside parts of our colony could be screwed. A mortar gun is pretty much capable of firing across the entire map, which of course makes it dangerous both in our hands and in the hands of our opponents. One way to retaliate against the mortar siege is to use your own mortar guns. For that, however, we need to research them first. With both the multi-analyzer and the sterile floor tiles that should go a bit faster than usual, the work speed of the research bench is currently improved by 20%, 10 from the multi-analyzer and a further 10 from the cleanliness of the room. After a few hours on the research bench, Cambiar's work is then interrupted as a small fire breaks out in the storage room. Needless to say, this is something we must take care of immediately, especially since the fire is spreading to our supplies. Honestly, it might be a good idea to reroute the conduits through the main corridor, even if that does cost a few more materials. And because a fire alone is apparently not enough to keep us busy, Randy Random also blesses Cambiar with another disease, this time sensory mechanites. The fire is quickly under control, however, and so we can now have a look at that disease, which is actually not all that bad. Yes, it causes some pain and rapidly increases Cambiar's tiredness, but it also improves various skills, including his hearing and sight. Now, this disease is definitely one that we want to tend to regularly, otherwise it will progress to the advanced stage, which brings no further benefits, but further increases the pain and tiredness drastically. If the disease is tended regularly, however, it is generally possible to avoid such an advancement. After a few bad things, Randy Random now decides to give us something good in the form of a crashed escape pod. The inhabitant, unfortunately, once again at the far end of the map. The skill set here, however, would make her an excellent fighter and researcher. The psychopath trait is also not too bad to have for a colony that regularly slaughters humans, and the injuries here are also not too severe, which is why I honestly thought about rescuing her. Unfortunately though, I then realized that our spare bedroom is not really well equipped for that. Yes, we do have a bed in there already. What's missing though is a heater to provide warmth. I highly doubt that we would be able to keep her alive long enough to make the trip back to the base and then also manage to build a heater and connect it, all of that before she loses any essential limbs to frostbite. So we are once again leaving a potential colonist out on the ice sheet to die, but we now have a heater, and on the next morning Cambiar also connects it to the power grid, so in the future, if they don't crash down too far away, we should be able to save colonists who interest us. Rinnick here unfortunately does not make the cut. In the time it took us to improve the guest room, she has died out on the ice sheet, but looking at our food situation, that might actually not be the worst thing in the world. Now, research-wise, we are sadly not progressing all that much at the moment. Even though we have several bonuses to Cambiar's research speed, Cambiar himself has to take frequent rests, as a result, of course, of the sensory mechanites. In the middle of the night, then, we at least make some progress in regards to his health situation, as Cambiar finally builds up an immunity against his flu. That will now cause the flu symptoms to calm down a bit, which is at least a small improvement. The remainder of the day then passes by without any incidents, and so we meet back up with Cambiar after a bit more work has done on the research project, and as another escape pod crashes down. Daniel here unfortunately does not have the traits I want. A melee fighter and animal handler is not exactly what I'm looking for, especially not if he can't do any research and also has the lazy trait. So because I'm convinced there are better options waiting for us, we will once again let this guy expire. The stab scar here in his right leg would also decrease his movement speed, and that is, at least out on the ice sheet, another argument against him. It only takes a few hours then for the survivor to turn into a corpse, and so with an outside temperature of minus 66 degrees Celsius, Cambiar heads out to bring Daniel's body back to the base. I have also just queued up a small but potentially life-saving deconstruction job, as Cambiar will now remove that last deadfall trap over here. Unlike with the other traps, for this one there is no way around it, so in theory Cambiar could trigger it as well. Admittedly, the chances for that are slim, but if it happens, it could mean trouble, so I'd rather play it safe. As the next morning rolls around, food problems are back on the menu. The Huskies have just consumed the remaining potatoes, we also only have less than 100 units of human meat left in storage, and so we should probably do something about that. Thanks to both of the escape pods, we luckily have 2 corpses available, so Cambiar can take a quick break from his research project and begin chopping. That means we now also once again have to grant the Huskies access to Cambiar's meat storage, and even with the 2 new butchered corpses, our reserves are probably not going to last long. One small positive thing here as Cambiar heads off to bed, the flu has finally disappeared completely. Now we only have to make sure that nobody starves to death. One more slightly interesting thing, our youngest husky Biscuit has reached the next maturity stage, as he is now a juvenile husky. That means we could start the hauling training now, but I'd rather wait with that for a while longer until the food situation has improved a bit. It would also once again take a significant amount of time away from Cambiar, who I think should spend that time doing more important stuff, for example research. Or alternatively, give the colony something to eat, because in a fortunate coincidence, a polar bear has just wandered onto the ice sheet. He is also fairly close by to the base, and so after his first meal of the day, we can send Cambiar and his assault rifle out on a hunting trip. One quick final check of the stats confirms, yes, Cambiar is still able to outrun the polar bear, and with that reassuring fact in mind, we can move him a bit closer and then open fire. No surprises here, the polar bear immediately gets up to attack, and so we can switch over to the ever-popular hit-and-run tactic. Luckily though, we already inflicted a big wound on the leg here, which now slows the polar bear down even further. After a few pot shots and a short trip around the structure here, we are then finally able to down the polar bear, and so Cambiar can now move up close to take care of the rest. And with a dead polar bear over his shoulder, Cambiar then returns to the base, where he immediately starts butchering. The polar bear corpse then produces 193 units of meat, but after our experiences with the potatoes, we should know by now how fast that can disappear. Still, at least for now, the Huskies will survive another day. A day that on Cambiar's side is spent mostly with research and resting, until things get interesting in the late evening, because we are about to be attacked. And no, these guys have not made an appearance yet. Introducing the Centipede. The Centipede is a type of mechanoid, very different however from the Scyther. While Scythers are fast, mobile and not the most well-armored enemies, Centipedes are the complete opposite, incredibly slow-moving but built like a tank. So we are grabbing ourselves the sniper rifle for this one, and then we'll talk strategy as we go along. Like I said, the Centipedes are incredibly tough to take down. Not only do they have an abundance of hit points, but they are also heavily armored, especially so against sharp damage, which includes both bullets and deadfall traps. Their biggest weakness is therefore undoubtedly their slow movement speed, and in the case of these two, also their choice of weaponry. Both of them are equipped with miniguns, which do shoot a very high amount of bullets, however they also have a high bullet spread, and over long range they are pretty much harmless. With the sniper rifle, Cambiar is then equipped with a weapon that is pretty much the exact opposite of that. Single shot, long range, high accuracy. We want to keep our distance in this fight and make every single shot count. Thanks to the slow speed of the Centipedes, the range difference between the sniper rifle and the minigun is a big advantage, as we should comfortably be able to get 3 shots off with the sniper rifle before our enemies can fire back at us. The speed difference then allows us to quickly gain distance again, and we can repeat the entire process. I don't think we'll be able to kill the Centipedes with this tactic. For that we will likely have to rely on the deadfall traps and probably also on the turrets, but every hit we land here will make the work a bit easier for our defenses. Now one last shot with the sniper rifle and it is finally time for us to retreat back behind our defenses. We now need to take care of 2 more things. The first one is very obvious. Of course, we need to switch on the turrets. While the deadfall traps are numerous and our enemies are only 2, we still have not beaten them down to a point where I can confidently say they won't make it through, so we will very likely need the extra firepower. Speaking of the extra firepower, with the centipedes likely making it into the base, we also want to switch weapons again. The slow recharge rate of the sniper rifle will not help us much in the close quarters of our base, which is why we hurry back inside to re-equip the assault rifle. We will, by the way, completely ignore the fact that our trade beacon has broken down. At least for the moment, I couldn't care less about that. I don't think Cambiar will be particularly focused on trading for the next few minutes. The centipedes, meanwhile, have both made it inside our trapped corridor, where they are taking quite the beating. Unfortunately, though, they are walking directly behind each other, which means the second centipede is largely able to avoid all of our traps. Cambiar, meanwhile, has positioned himself in cover and at the far end of the turrets, which will very likely lead to the centipedes attacking the turrets first because they're closer. And here we are now, both enemies make it out of the traps alive, and they immediately walk into the crossfire. One convenient advantage of the stone chunk field here, as long as the centipedes are moving through that, they are unable to stop and take shots themselves. Eventually though, the first centipede makes it out of the stones, and immediately fires up his minigun to take a shot at the turrets. And that is now where the turret's positioning and the minigun's inaccuracy comes into play, as most of the shots go wide and only hit the wall and the sandbags. Cambiar, meanwhile, can continue to fire from his relatively safe position. One more burst from the assault rifle then, and the first centipede already goes down, and just a few seconds later the second one follows. So, quick breather, crisis averted. Yes, our defenses took a bit of damage, but the most important thing, Cambiar survived the encounter without a scratch. By the way, one of the mechanoids here did only go down but did not die, so we now have to manually shut it off. And contrary to the scythers, we unfortunately cannot remove any valuable body parts. We should focus though on securing the miniguns as fast as possible. Every single point of deterioration will make them a little less valuable, and while we could use one for combat situations in the future, keeping 2 of them around might be a bit excessive. Inside of the storage room we can then also have Cambiar fix the trade beacon. One of our husky companions thankfully takes care of the second minigun, and so with the beacon operational again, Cambiar can now take a quick snack and then a round of rest. Not for long though, because you never know what happens next out on the ice sheet, and so we should probably rearm those traps quickly. Once that is done, we will haul the centipede corpses into our storage room. Just like the scythers, they can be disassembled for steel components and plasteel, but at least for the moment we don't need any of that. We can also have Cambiar shut off the turrets again, and then, still not healed from his mechanite disease, Cambiar once again gets tired and heads off to bed. And that is, in my opinion, also a very good point to wrap the episode up. I have to admit, I was a bit concerned when the centipedes showed up, but I think we handled the fight pretty well, even though our defenses might need a slight upgrade in the future. That might already happen in the next episode. For today, I hope you enjoyed this one. As always, if you did, then I would be happy if you could leave a thumbs up. And if you want to support the channel, then you can now either subscribe if you haven't already, or you can support the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.